In the final chaotic months of World War II, an American patrol stumbled upon the most unlikely prisoners of war, a group of elderly German women, exhausted and trembling with cold and hunger. They expected retribution, humiliation, the treatment war had taught them to fear. Instead, American soldiers offered blankets, hot water, and food, even helping them to their feet. The moment left the women frozen in disbelief, unable to comprehend that humanity could still exist in the hell of war. And then, a painful secret emerged. February 1945, Western Germany. The forest stretched endlessly before Sergeant Robert Miller, bare branches reaching toward a gray sky like skeletal fingers. Behind him, his squad moved carefully through the snow, their breath forming small clouds in the frozen air. Every tree could hide a sniper. Every shadow could conceal the enemy. The temperature had dropped below freezing 3 days ago and hadn't climbed since. Ice crystals formed on their helmets, on their rifles, on the stubble of their unshaven faces. Miller had stopped feeling his toes around midday. His fingers ached inside his gloves. But these were minor discomforts, barely worth noting. A man could live with cold feet. He couldn't live with a bullet through the skull. And that was the greater concern out here in these woods where the front line had dissolved into chaos and every encounter was a gamble. Miller had been fighting across Europe for 11 months, and in that time, he had learned that war made no sense. The further they pushed into Germany, the more chaotic everything became. German forces were collapsing, fragmenting into scattered units that fought with the desperation of cornered animals. Villages changed hands daily. Civilians fled in every direction, their belongings piled onto carts and wheelbarrows, their faces hollow with fear and hunger. The neat battle lines of the history books had never existed here, only confusion, terror, and the constant grinding presence of death. He had joined up in 42, right after Pearl Harbor, full of righteous anger and naive certainty about good and evil. War had been simple then. Stop the Nazis, save the world, come home a hero. Now, after seeing what he had seen, the devastated cities, the skeletal survivors of concentration camps, the young German boys forced to fight in uniforms that hung on their starving frames, nothing seemed simple anymore. Evil existed, certainly, but so did 1,000 shades of gray, and most people lived in those murky in-between spaces, trying to survive systems they had no power to change. Sergeant. Private Jack Hawkins appeared at his shoulder, his rifle held ready. At 19, Hawkins was the youngest in the squad, his face still carrying traces of boyhood beneath the grime and stubble. He had grown up fast in the 11 weeks since joining them, but Miller could still see flashes of the scared kid from Iowa who had arrived wide-eyed and eager at the replacement depot. Thompson says he heard something up ahead. Voices, maybe. Could be civilians. Could be stragglers. Miller raised his fist, and the squad halted immediately. 10 men, spread out in a loose formation, weapons ready. They had learned to move like ghosts through these forests, communicating with hand signals and shared understanding born from months of surviving together. Behind them, Corporal Anna Chen moved up quietly. She wasn't technically part of their unit. She was a field medic attached to the battalion, but she had been with them for 3 weeks now, ever since their regular medic caught shrapnel in Alsace. Miller trusted her judgment more than most of the officers he had met. The sound of gunfire had become so constant that its absence was more disturbing than its presence. Out here, in this pocket of eerie quiet, every snap of a twig seemed to echo. Every breath felt too loud. Could be civilians, Anna whispered. Could be wounded. Could be an ambush, Hawkins countered, his voice tight with the kind of paranoia that kept soldiers alive. Last week, Jensen's squad got hit by civilians wearing white flags. Lost 3 men before they realized what was happening. That was different, Anna said, but her hand had moved to the pistol at her hip. Those were Volkssturm. Old men and teenagers, but still armed. Miller held up his hand for silence. He listened. The forest was never truly quiet. Wind in the branches, distant artillery rumbling like thunder, but there was something else now. A sound that didn't belong. Coughing. Harsh, wet coughing that spoke of cold and sickness. Spread out, Miller ordered quietly. Weapons ready. If I give the signal, hit the dirt. They moved forward through the trees, each man covering the others. The coughing grew louder, joined now by other sounds, shuffling footsteps, the scrape of something being dragged through snow. A woman's voice speaking German in low, urgent tones. Miller raised his hand again. Through the trees ahead, he could see movement, figures in dark clothing, hunched against the cold. His finger moved to his trigger guard. Then one of the figures stepped into a patch of pale sunlight, and Miller froze. It was an old woman, not just old ancient. Her face was a map of wrinkles, her hair white as the snow around her. She wore a threadbare coat that might once have been part of some auxiliary uniform, and she moved with the painful slowness of someone whose joints had long since forgotten how to bend easily. Behind her came others, more women, all elderly, all dressed in similar worn clothing. Some supported each other. One was being half-carried by two companions. Their faces were gaunt, their movements unsteady. Jesus Christ, Hawkins breathed. Miller stepped forward, his rifle still raised but no longer pointing directly at the women. "Halt!" he called out in his rough German. "Hands up!" The effect was immediate and devastating. The women stopped as if they had hit an invisible wall. Several cried out. Others began to weep. Every single one of them raised their hands, many trembling so badly they could barely keep their arms up. One woman, perhaps 70 years old, sank to her knees in the snow. "Bitte," she sobbed. "Bitte nicht schießen, please. Please don't shoot." Anna pushed past Miller, her medic's instincts overriding everything else. "My God, Robert, look at them. They're starving." She was right. Now that Miller looked properly, he could see the signs everywhere. Sunken cheeks, hollow eyes, the way their clothes hung loose on frames that had shrunk from lack of food. Several women were coughing now, and he recognized the wet, rattling sound of pneumonia. "Sergeant," Hawkins' voice was tight with tension. "This could be a trick. We've heard stories about—" "Look at them, Jack," Miller interrupted. "Really, look." The oldest woman, the one who had fallen to her knees, suddenly pitched forward onto her hands. For a moment, Miller thought she was bowing or begging. Then, he realized she had simply collapsed, her strength finally giving out completely. Anna was already running forward. "I need help here." Miller made a decision. "Hawkins, Thompson, secure the perimeter. Everyone else, lower your weapons. Chen, do what you can." He approached the group slowly, hands visible, rifle pointed at the ground. The women watched him with the wary, helpless eyes of cornered animals. He counted 12 of them. The youngest looked to be in her 50s. The oldest, the one who had collapsed, might have been 75 or 80. "Sprechen Sie English?" he asked. "Do you speak English?" One woman, her face weathered and hard, stepped forward slightly. "Ein bisschen," she said. "A little." Her English, when it came, was heavily accented but understandable. "We surrender. Please. We are not soldiers." "What are you then?" Miller asked. The woman's lips trembled. "Auxiliary, kitchen, cleaning. The army. They take us from homes, make us work. Now the army is gone. We have nowhere to go." Behind her, Anna was checking the collapsed woman. "She's breathing, but barely. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, probably hypothermia. Robert, these women need help. Now." Miller looked at the faces around him, his men, watching him for orders. The German women, expecting death or worse. Anna, her face set with determination. He unslung his pack and pulled out a wool blanket. The women flinched back as he approached the collapsed figure, clearly expecting violence. Instead, he knelt down and carefully wrapped the blanket around her thin shoulders. "Someone get me a canteen," he said quietly. "Warm if you've got it." For several long seconds, nobody moved. The German women stared at Miller as if he had performed some incomprehensible miracle. Then, slowly, one of them began to cry. Not the desperate sobbing of before, but something quieter, deeper, the sound of someone whose last defenses had finally crumbled. Private Martinez stepped forward with his canteen. "It's lukewarm, Sarge. But it's something. Anna took it gratefully and held it to the old woman's lips. She drank weakly, coughing, but she drank. The rest of you, Miller said, gesturing to the other women. Sit down. You're exhausted. The woman who spoke English translated, and the group slowly, hesitantly, lowered themselves to the ground. Several couldn't manage it on their own and had to be helped by their companions. Miller pulled out his K-ration and broke it into pieces, handing them out. I don't understand, Sarge, Hawkins said quietly, keeping his voice low enough that only Miller could hear. This could still be a setup. They could be leading us into an ambush. Look at them, Jack. Really look. That woman there, he nodded toward one of the elderly prisoners. She weighs maybe 90 pounds. She can barely stand. You think she's going to pull a grenade out of her coat? But the Germans, Miller interrupted gently, are people. Some of them monsters. Yeah, but some of them are just people who got caught in the same hell we did. He watched as the women ate, with the careful, almost fearful movements of people who weren't sure if the food would be snatched away again. One woman held her piece of chocolate bar in both hands, staring at it as if it were treasure. Another woman was sharing her portion with a companion who seemed too weak to chew properly. The woman who spoke English approached Miller hesitantly. Up close, he could see the deep lines around her eyes, the gray in her hair, the way her hands shook even now that the immediate danger had passed. Why? She asked simply. Why what? Why you help us? We are German. We are enemy. Miller considered the question. Because you're human beings, he said finally. And because someone has to remember that, or else what the hell are we fighting for? The woman's eyes filled with tears. For 3 days, she whispered. We walk. No food. No water. The soldiers, our soldiers, they leave us. Say we are too slow, too old. Say the Amerikaner will kill us anyway, so what does it matter? Who told you that? Miller asked. Everyone. The radio. The officers. They say the Amerikaner are devils. They say you will take revenge for everything Germany has done. We believe it. We are so afraid. She looked at the blanket wrapped around her companion, at the men sharing their rations, at Anna carefully checking each woman for injuries or illness. But you are not devils, she said, wonder and confusion mixing in her voice. You are just men. They couldn't stay in the forest. Miller knew that much. The nearest American position was 5 miles west, and these women would never make it on their own. They would have to be escorted. All right, he said, gathering his squad. We're taking them to the POW processing center in Krefeld. Thompson, Hawkins, take point. Martinez and Chen will stay with the prisoners. Everyone else maintains perimeter security. Sarge, Thompson protested, that's going to slow us way down. We're supposed to be on reconnaissance. Reconnaissance can wait, Miller said firmly. These women can't. The march was slow and painful. The elderly women could barely manage a shuffle, even with the American soldiers supporting them. Every 100 yards, someone had to stop to rest. The woman Miller had wrapped in his blanket could only walk with 2 people holding her up. As they moved through the forest, the women began to talk, at first hesitantly, then with growing urgency, as if they had been holding stories inside for too long and finally had someone who would listen. The woman who spoke English, her name was Marguerite, told Miller about her life before the war. She had been a school teacher in Cologne. Her husband had died in the First War, the one they used to call the Great War before this one made it seem small by comparison. Her 3 sons had all been conscripted. 2 were dead. The 3rd was missing, presumed captured by the Russians. They came to my school, she said as they walked. Men in uniform. They say the fatherland needs everyone, even old women. They take us to work in supply depot, cooking, cleaning, sewing uniforms. They say it is patriotic duty. What happened when the army retreated? Miller asked. Margarite's face darkened. They left us. The officers. They take the trucks, the supplies, everything. They tell us to walk west, stay ahead of the Russians. But we are old. We are slow. Some women, they try to go home. The SS find them. What did the SS do? She was quiet for a long moment. They shoot them. In the town square. They say anyone who deserts is traitor. Anyone who tries to surrender is traitor. We are also afraid. Another woman, walking beside them, spoke up in halting English. Her name was Helga. She had worked in a textile factory before being conscripted into auxiliary service. My daughter, she said. She is in Dusseldorf. I do not know if she lives. The bombing. So much bombing. I'm sorry, Miller said, and meant it. The oldest woman, the one who had collapsed, was named Greta. She was 78 years old, and she was nearly blind. She told Anna, through Margaretha's translation, that she had been conscripted despite her age and failing health because her pension had been stopped. Her husband had been a union organizer. The Nazis arrested him in 1934. I am ready to die, Greta said simply. I have been ready for years, but I am grateful to see that there is still kindness before I go. The words hit Miller harder than he expected. He had spent 11 months seeing the worst of humanity, the bodies in the fields, the burned villages, the refugees with their hollow eyes and their stories of atrocity. He had started to believe that war had burned away everything good, leaving only ash and rage. But here were these women, enemy nationals, prisoners of war, thanking him for basic human decency. It made him realize how low the bar had fallen, how much they had all lost. They had been walking for 3 hours when Hawkins raised his fist. The column halted immediately. Miller moved forward, his rifle coming up. What is it? Movement, Hawkins whispered. 3 o'clock, maybe 200 yards. Miller squinted into the trees. For a moment he saw nothing. Then there, a flash of Feldgrau, the distinctive gray-green of German uniforms. More movement, multiple figures, trying to move quietly through the underbrush. Behind him, the women had seen it too. Margaretha's face went white. Wehrmacht, she breathed. Everyone down, Miller ordered quietly. His men dropped into defensive positions immediately, finding cover behind trees and rocks. The elderly women were slower, confused, some crying out in fear. Irda, a voice called out in German from the trees. You there, halt! 5 German soldiers emerged from the forest. They were young, terrifyingly young. The oldest might have been 20. They wore the remnants of Wehrmacht uniforms, but there was something ragged and desperate about them. Their eyes had the wild look of men who had been pushed beyond reason. The leader, a thin boy with a corporal's insignia, pointed at the women. You, he shouted in German. What are you doing with the enemy? Margaretha tried to stand, but Miller put a hand on her shoulder, keeping her down. Stay behind me, he said quietly. The German corporal switched to broken English. You are prisoners. You come with us. They're already prisoners, Miller called back, his rifle trained on the German soldiers. American prisoners. We're taking them to a processing center. Traitors, the corporal spat, glaring at the women. Deserters, you will be shot for this. Margaretha's voice trembled as she replied in German. Miller didn't understand all the words, but he caught enough. She was explaining that they had surrendered, that they had no choice, that they were not soldiers. The German corporal raised his rifle. Anyone who cooperates with the enemy is a traitor. You will return to your posts immediately or face execution. Miller's finger moved to his trigger. Around him, his men had the German soldiers in their sights. It would be a bloodbath. The Germans were outnumbered, but in the initial exchange of fire, people would die, probably including some of the elderly women caught in the middle. Corporal, Miller said carefully, keeping his voice level. The war is over. You know it. I know it. These women know it. You can walk away right now. Take your men and go. Nobody has to die today. Germany does not surrender, the young soldier shouted, but Miller heard the crack in his voice. Fear. The kid was terrified. Germany already has surrendered, Miller said quietly. You just haven't heard about it yet. Go home, son. This is over. For a long moment, Nobody moved. The German corporal's rifle wavered. His men looked at each other uncertainly. Then, slowly, the corporal lowered his weapon. "Traitors," he said again. But there was no force behind it now, just exhaustion. He looked at the women one more time, then jerked his head to his squad. They melted back into the forest. Miller didn't lower his rifle until they were completely out of sight. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. "Jesus," Hawkins whispered. That was close. Behind them, Greta had started crying. The sound was heartbreaking, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her frail body. Anna moved to her immediately, but Greta waved her away. "They would have killed us," Margarita translated quietly. "Our own soldiers, because we wanted to live." They made camp an hour later, too exhausted to continue. Miller posted guards, but he suspected the German soldiers were long gone, running for their lives just like everyone else in this dying war. The women huddled together for warmth, sharing the blankets the Americans had provided. Martinez built a small fire, despite the risk of attracting attention. These women needed warmth more than they needed stealth. Anna moved from woman to woman, checking pulses, examining the worst of the frostbite and malnutrition cases. Miller sat nearby, watching the fire and thinking about the young German corporal's face. That boy would probably be dead within a week, either killed by American forces or executed by his own side for showing mercy. Margarita approached him hesitantly. "Sergeant Miller? May I speak with you?" "Of course." She sat down beside him, her movements stiff and painful. For a while, she just stared at the fire. "I must tell you something," she said finally. "Something we have not said. Something we are ashamed to speak." Miller waited. "We worked at depot near Buchenwald," Margarita said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We did not know, at first. They told us it was labor camp, political prisoners. We believed. Or, we wanted to believe." Miller felt his stomach turn cold. "We saw things," she continued, tears streaming down her face now. "The trains, the smoke, the prisoners who came to work in our kitchens, so thin you could see their bones. We knew. We knew something terrible was happening. But we were afraid. If we spoke, if we asked questions, we would disappear too." She looked at Miller with desperate eyes. "I am not asking forgiveness. I know there is no forgiveness for what we allowed to happen. I wanted you to know, so you understand why we were so afraid when we saw you. Why we thought you would kill us. Because we deserve it." Miller was quiet for a long time. He thought about the photographs he had seen, the stories the liberators of the camps told, the magnitude of the horror that had been inflicted. "Did you hurt anyone?" he asked finally. "Directly, I mean. Did you participate in any of it?" "No," Margarita said. "Never. We cooked food for Wehrmacht soldiers. We cleaned buildings. We saw nothing directly. But we knew. Everyone knew." "Then you're not the same as the people who ran those camps," Miller said. "You're guilty of being human, of being afraid, of trying to survive in a system designed to make good people complicit in evil. That's not the same as being evil yourself." "But we did nothing to stop it," she whispered. "What could you have done?" Miller asked. "You're a 70-year-old woman. If you had spoken up, they would have killed you. Would that have saved anyone? Would that have stopped anything?" He shook his head. "The people who need to answer for what happened are the ones who planned it, the ones who built it, the ones who carried it out. Not the scared old women who got caught in the machinery." Margarita was weeping openly now. "I pray every night," she said. "I pray that God will forgive us, that someday someone will understand that we were trapped, that we had no power, but I do not expect forgiveness. I do not deserve it." "Maybe none of us deserve forgiveness," Miller said quietly. "I've killed people in this war. Young men, most of them. Kids who probably got conscripted just like you did. Kids who were scared and doing what they were told. Am I guilty? Am I evil?" He looked at the fire. "War makes everyone guilty. The only choice we have is what we do when we get the chance to choose. And you chose to surrender instead of dying for a lost cause. That's something. They reached the American lines the next afternoon. The processing center in Krefeld was a former school building, now surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers. Miller had been there before, dropping off captured German soldiers. It was efficient but impersonal, a machine for categorizing and containing the enemy. The officer in charge, Lieutenant Davies, came out to meet them. He stopped short when he saw the group of elderly women. What the hell, Miller? Prisoners, sir. Auxiliary personnel. They surrendered in the forest. Davies walked closer, examining the women with obvious disbelief. Their grandmothers. Yes, sir. Jesus Christ. Davies shook his head. All right, we'll get them processed. Medical will want to look at them first. They look half dead. They are half dead, sir, Anna said, stepping forward. They need immediate care. Food, warm clothes, medical attention. They've been walking for days with no supplies. Davies nodded. I'll make sure they get it. We're not barbarians. He looked at Miller. You did the right thing, Sergeant. Bringing them in instead of leaving them out there to freeze. As the women were led away to the medical section, Margaretha turned back. She said something in German to Greta, who nodded and reached into her coat. She pulled out a small piece of fabric, a handkerchief, old and carefully mended, with the word Danke embroidered in faded thread. She pressed it into Miller's hand. Her clouded eyes searched his face, and though she couldn't see clearly, he thought she could see what mattered. The handkerchief was soft with age, the embroidery done with a careful hand decades ago. He could imagine her as a younger woman, sitting by a window, creating this small piece of beauty in a world that was about to tear itself apart. Thank you, Margaretha translated softly. She says to tell you that her son died in Russia. He was a good boy, kind, like you. She says thank you for showing her that there are still good boys in the world, that her son did not die in vain if men like you still exist. Miller's throat tightened. He wanted to say something profound, something worthy of the moment and the gift, but words seemed inadequate. Instead, he carefully folded his fingers around the handkerchief, treating it with the reverence it deserved, not just a piece of cloth, but a symbol of hope that had survived the darkest chapter in human history. Tell her I'm sorry for her loss, he managed finally, and that I'll keep this safe. I'll remember. Margaretha relayed his words. Greta nodded once, then reached up and patted his cheek gently, the way his own grandmother used to do when he was a child. The gesture was so achingly familiar, so universal in its tenderness, that Miller felt something crack inside his chest. All the armor he had built up over 11 months of war, all the careful emotional distance he had maintained to stay sane, suddenly seemed paper-thin. The women were led inside. Miller stood in the yard, watching them go, the handkerchief clutched in his hand. You okay, Sarge? Hawkins asked. Miller nodded slowly. Yeah, I think I am. Epilogue. 3 weeks later. Miller found himself back at the processing center 3 weeks later. The war in Europe had ended. Hitler was dead. Germany had surrendered unconditionally. The shooting had stopped, but the work of dealing with millions of displaced people, prisoners, and refugees had only just begun. He asked about the women. A clerk directed him to the medical wing, where they had been kept for observation and treatment. They looked different, still old, still worn, but no longer on the edge of death. They had proper clothes now, donated by relief organizations. Their faces had filled out slightly with regular meals. Greta sat in a chair by a window, her face turned toward the sun. Margaretha saw him first. Her face lit up with recognition and something deeper gratitude that went beyond words. Sergeant Miller, she said, standing slowly. The other women turned, and suddenly he was surrounded by elderly German women, all trying to thank him at once in broken English and rapid German. I just wanted to see how you were doing, he said, embarrassed by the attention. We are alive, Margaretha said simply. Because of you. Because you remembered we were human. One by one, the women approached him. Some shook his hand. Others hugged him, ignoring his discomfort. Greta stood last, moving slowly on Anna's arm. She spoke in German, and Margaretha translated. She says she has lived to see the war end. She has lived to see that there is still good in the world. She says she can die in peace now, knowing that hatred did not win everything. Greta reached up and touched Miller's face gently, the way a grandmother might touch a beloved grandchild. Then she smiled, the first smile he had seen from any of them, and turned back to her chair in the sunlight. As Miller left the building, Anna caught up with him. "That was good of you," she said, "coming back to check on them." "I needed to see," he said. "Needed to know they were okay." Why? He thought about it. Because in this whole goddamn war, this is the one thing I did that I'm proud of. Not killing people, not taking ground, just treating some scared old women like human beings. He looked back at the building. Through the window, he could see Greta sitting in her chair. Face turned toward the light, the sun illuminated her profile, and for a moment she looked almost ethereal, as if she were already halfway between this world and whatever came next. But there was peace in her posture, a serenity that had been utterly absent when he first found her in that frozen forest. "Maybe that's what we should have been doing all along," he said quietly, "remembering that we're better than the darkness we're fighting. In war, some choose hatred, some choose revenge, some choose cruelty because cruelty has been done to them. But there are always those who choose differently, those who remember, even in the darkest moments, that the enemy soldier is also someone's son, that the prisoner is also someone's mother, that beneath every uniform, every flag, every ideology, there is simply a human being trying to survive." Robert Miller returned home to Pennsylvania in August 1945. He carried with him Greta's handkerchief, which he kept until his death in 1987. His daughter donated it to the National World War II Museum, where it remains today, a small piece of fabric representing a moment when humanity triumphed over the machinery of war. Greta passed away peacefully in December 1945, 6 months after the war's end. Margaretha survived until 1963, eventually reconnecting with a niece in Hamburg. In interviews conducted in the 1,950 seconds, she always spoke of the American soldiers who had shown her mercy when she expected none. "They proved," she said in one interview, "that in the midst of the greatest evil humanity has ever created, there were still those who chose compassion." That is what I want people to remember, not just the horror, but the fact that goodness survived,